The battlefield smelled of smoke and blood. Kareth could feel the heat on his skin, even though the air was freezing. All around him, the once green plains of Virelia were now black and burned. He stood still for a moment, his breathing heavy, trying to understand how it had all gone so wrong. When the war began, his people believed they would crush the humans in days. Now his people were gone, and he was the only one left. It had started with a single flash in the sky. Kareth had been a soldier for 12 cycles, trained in the finest military academy of his world. He was strong, disciplined, and proud of his service. The day the human fleet arrived, his commanders laughed. They said the humans were young, weak, and poorly equipped. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Kareth remembered the first human attack. It wasn't a massive bombardment like his people expected. It was precise. Every strike hit something important: fuel depots, command centers, communication towers. The humans didn't waste fire. They didn't shout war cries. They moved with quiet, cold focus. That silence was more terrifying than any battle roar. His unit had been ordered to push forward and meet the human soldiers on the ground. Kareth thought they would fight like any other species, clumsy, loud, and slow. Instead, the humans were shadows in the smoke. They struck from angles he didn't even know existed. They used the terrain as if it had been made for them. Every move was a trap, and every trap was a death sentence. He saw his first close quarters fight when Sergeant Thren, the strongest in their squad, met a single human soldier. Thren towered over the man, his armor shining and his blade ready. The human didn't hesitate. He moved in fast, avoiding the strike, and drove a short blade into the gaps of Thren's armor. It was over in seconds. Kareth had fought for years, but he had never seen such speed and precision. From that day, the war was no longer about victory. It was about survival. The humans advanced without rest. They fought in storms and darkness, and even in the dead of night when most species couldn't. See, their machines were not the most beautiful or advanced, but they worked in perfect unity with their soldiers. Every soldier seemed to know what the others were thinking. Kareth began to fear that they didn't just fight together, they thought. Together, one night, Kareth's camp was attacked. The alarms never sounded. He woke to the sound of whispers and the hiss of suppressed fire. By the time he grabbed his weapon, half the camp was gone. The humans didn't leave bodies behind. They left only silence. That silence followed him everywhere after that night. It was as if the war itself had gone quiet, except for the moments when death came close. Kareth started to notice something else: humans didn't look like monsters. They bled red like him. They moved with purpose, but not cruelty. They killed because it was war, not because they wanted to. That confused him. He had been told they were savage and unthinking. But on the battlefield, they fought with intelligence, patience, and strangely, mercy. If a soldier was unarmed, sometimes they let them go. That small mercy was more terrifying than brutality, because it meant they were in complete control. Day the front collapsed was the day Kareth lost everything. His people's fleet was gone, burned in the upper atmosphere. The ground armies were broken and scattered. Commanders either fled or died. Kareth's unit, once 200 strong, was down to 7. They fought in the ruins of their own city. Where the smoke hid the sun, the humans kept coming. No shouting, no rage, just the steady advance of soldiers who knew they had already won. When the last of his comrades fell, Kareth ran. He didn't want to die there, in the ashes. He hid among the wreckage, moving at night, drinking from muddy pools, eating whatever he could find. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps behind him. Sometimes he saw shadows moving in the dark. He didn't know if they were real, or if the war had simply burned its way into his mind. Either way, he kept moving, because stopping meant death. Now, standing on the scorched plain, Kareth could still hear the hum of human war machines in the distance. He didn't know why they hadn't killed him yet. Maybe they didn't see him as a threat. Maybe they wanted him to carry the story of what happened here. If that was their plan, it was working. Kareth would never forget what he saw. And if anyone asked him what the human warfront was like, he would only say one thing: hell itself would have been kinder. Kareth moved through the ruins of Virelia with careful steps. The city that once shone with crystal towers now lay in broken heaps of glass and steel. The streets were littered with wreckage, smoke still curling from the shattered buildings. He kept his head low, scanning for movement. Every sound made his muscles tighten. Somewhere out there, the humans were still hunting. He had heard stories of their scouts, small groups that could wipe out entire squads before anyone raised an alarm. They didn't travel in great numbers. They didn't need to. A handful of humans could destroy more than 100 trained soldiers. Kareth had seen it himself. Their weapons were not just powerful, they were clever. They adapted to every shield and armor type his people used. Every time his commanders thought they had found a counter, the humans changed their tactics overnight. Kareth stopped at the edge of an alley, peering around the corner. A human drone hovered in the distance, its small frame scanning the ruins. It wasn't armed, but he knew better than to think it harmless. Those drones called in strikes. If it saw him, his hiding place would be nothing but dust. He waited for it to pass, pressing himself against the cold wall. His breathing slowed, his heart pounding in his ears. When it finally moved on, he slipped away like a shadow. He found shelter in what used to be a marketplace. The roof was half gone, and sunlight filtered through in weak beams. Around him lay the remains of goods. Cloths burned black, food turned to ash, tools broken and twisted. In the center of the market, a single water pump still worked. He turned the handle slowly, filling a cracked container. The sound of the water felt strange after so many days of silence. It reminded him of home, and that hurt more than he expected. That night, he made a small fire, careful to keep the smoke hidden. He chewed on dry ration packs he had found on a dead soldier. They weren't from his people, they were human rations. The taste was bitter, almost metallic, but they filled his stomach. It unsettled him, eating food meant for the enemy. But hunger was stronger than pride. As he ate, he thought about the humans again. How they had appeared so suddenly. How their war machines moved with a rhythm that felt almost alive. They didn't just fight battles, they dismantled enemies piece by piece until nothing was left. Sleep came in short bursts, broken by dreams of flashing lights and the screams of his comrades. In one dream, he saw Sergeant Thren again, standing, proud and fearless. But the image twisted. Thren was on the ground, the human's short blade buried in his chest. Kareth woke with a gasp, his body shaking. He hated the dreams, but he hated the moments of silence more. Silence meant they were coming. At dawn, Kareth left the marketplace. The sky was pale and cold. He moved through the outskirts of the city, heading toward the river. Water meant life, but it also meant risk. Humans often set ambushes near resources. Still, he had no choice. He walked for hours, his eyes scanning every rooftop, every shadow. At times he thought he saw movement. Flicker of armor, the glint of a weapon. He could never be sure. The humans were too skilled at hiding. That was their true strength. They didn't need to be seen to control the battlefield. When he reached the river, he knelt to drink, the icy water burning his throat. That was when he heard it, a soft crunch of rubble behind him. His hand went to his weapon, his body tense. Slowly, he turned his head. Standing on the bank was a human soldier. The man's armor was scratched and worn, his face hidden behind a visor. He didn't raise his weapon. He just stood there, watching Kareth. For a long moment, neither moved. Kareth's instincts screamed to attack, to run, to do anything. But something about the man's stance stopped him. The human wasn't aiming at him. His weapon was lowered, his movements calm. Kareth felt a strange chill run through him. This soldier had every reason to kill him, yet he didn't. Instead, humans stepped back, turning away into the mist. Within seconds, he was gone, leaving only footprints in the wet soil. Kareth stayed frozen for a long time, staring at the place where the man had stood. He didn't understand it. Why let him live? Was it mercy or something else? The thought wouldn't leave him. If the humans were sparing him, it wasn't by accident. And that possibility was far more dangerous than death. Asterisk. Kareth moved on from the river with the image of the human soldier fixed in his mind. Every step he took, he replayed the moment again and again. The man had been close enough to kill him without a fight. Close enough to end the last surviving soldier of Virelia. Yet he had walked away. In war, that kind of choice was not a mistake. It was deliberate. He followed the river north, keeping to the shadows of broken walls and burned trees. The land around him was silent except for the distant rumble of human machines. That sound was everywhere now, a low, steady thunder that seemed to come from the ground itself. It reminded him that no matter where he went, he was still inside their reach. The humans didn't lose track of enemies. They just let them run until they wanted to catch them. By midday, Kareth reached the outskirts of what had once been an industrial zone. Massive metal towers leaned at sharp angles, their support beams twisted and blackened. The air smelled of rust and chemical ash. He moved carefully, stepping over debris and watching the high points for snipers. His people had once controlled these factories. Now the markings of his army were half covered in soot, and strange human symbols had been painted over them. It was a quiet declaration. The humans owned this place now. In the shadow of a collapsed storage building, Kareth stopped to rest. His water was running low again. As he sat, he noticed faint tracks in the dirt boots, smaller than his own. Moving in a zigzag pattern, they were fresh. He crouched low, running his fingers over the prints. He didn't know why, but they felt familiar. The human at the river had worn boots like these. The thought sent a chill through him. Was he being followed, or was he being led somewhere? He decided to keep moving, but his pace slowed. Every sound made him turn his head. A clatter of metal in the distance. A flicker of movement on a rooftop. Nothing stayed in sight for long. And that made it worse. He couldn't fight what he couldn't see. The war had taught him many things, but the hardest lesson was this. Humans didn't need to overpower you to win. They only needed you to believe they could, as night began to fall. Kareth found an abandoned bunker near the edge of the industrial zone. Its entrance was half buried in rubble, but the door still opened with a groan. Inside, the air was stale, the walls covered in dust. He searched the small space and found a few sealed ration cans, his own people's supplies, untouched. For a moment he almost smiled. It was a rare victory, no matter how small. He set a trap at the door, more for his peace of mind than real defense, and settled in to eat. He didn't sleep much. The silence outside pressed against the bunker walls, like a living thing. Once he thought he heard footsteps above him, slow and measured. He froze, holding his breath, but they faded into nothing. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it wasn't. In war, the difference hardly mattered. You learned to live with the uncertainty. Or you didn't live at all. When dawn came, Kareth left the bunker and made his way toward the hills beyond the factories. The land here was open, dangerous. He could be seen from far away, but it also gave him a clear view of anyone approaching. He moved quickly, scanning the horizon. That was when he saw a thin column of black smoke rising in the distance. Not the thick, choking smoke of a bombardment, but a smaller, steady stream. It looked like a campfire. Part of him wanted to turn away. A fire meant people, and people meant risk. But another part of him, the part still clinging to survival, knew it could also mean food, water, and shelter. He decided to move closer, keeping low in the grass. As he neared, he saw figures around the fire. At first, he thought they were more of his kind. But as the light caught their shapes, his stomach tightened. They were humans, 3 of them, sitting in a loose circle, their weapons close at hand. He stayed hidden watching them. They weren't like the soldiers he had seen before. Their armor was lighter, their faces uncovered. They spoke quietly, passing a metal flask between them. They didn't look like they were preparing for a fight. Instead, they looked tired. Tired in a way that felt familiar to him. For a moment, he forgot the war and saw only 3 living beings trying to keep warm in the cold. And then, one of them looked up directly at him, as if they had known he was there all along. Kareth's body tensed the moment the human's eyes met his. He froze in the grass, barely breathing. The soldier didn't shout, didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, the man nudged the one sitting beside him and nodded toward the hill. All 3 humans turned to look at Kareth. Their expressions were unreadable, but none of them moved to attack. That was almost worse than if they had fired. Slowly, the one who had spotted him stood up. He raised a hand not in a threat, but in a calm gesture, palm open. Kareth's training screamed at him to retreat, to disappear before they closed the distance. But his curiosity was stronger. These were not the cold, unstoppable fighters he had seen on the front lines. There was something different about them. Reluctantly, he rose from the grass, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. The human kept walking toward him, step by step. When they were only a few paces apart, the man stopped. His voice was steady, low, and without anger. "You're far from the fight," he said. Kareth didn't answer. He didn't trust the human's tone. It wasn't mockery, and it wasn't pity. It was observation. The man didn't press for a reply. He simply tilted his head toward the campfire, as if inviting Kareth closer. Against all logic, Kareth found his feet moving forward. The other 2 humans watched him carefully as he approached. Their hands rested near their weapons, but they didn't aim them. When he reached the fire, the warmth hit him hard. He hadn't felt real heat since the war began. The humans made space, and the one who had spoken handed him the metal flask. Kareth hesitated, sniffing the contents. It was just water. He drank slowly, the cool liquid easing the dryness in his throat. For a long while, no one spoke. The fire popped softly, the only sound between them. Kareth found himself studying their faces. They were young, yet their eyes looked older than his own. They had the same tiredness he had seen in every survivor, alien or human. Finally, the one across from him broke the silence. "You were at Virelia," she said. It wasn't a question. Kareth's hand tightened around the flask. He gave a small nod. She didn't smile, but her gaze didn't harden either. "You fought well," she added. The words caught him off guard. Praise from an enemy was not something he had ever expected. He searched their faces for a trap, but found none. They weren't mocking him, they were simply stating a fact. That unsettled him even more. Humans, in his experience, didn't waste time with empty words. If they said something, they meant it. Which meant they respected him, despite everything. After a while, they passed him a small packet of dried food. He ate cautiously, his eyes never leaving theirs. The taste was plain, but it was real nourishment. The humans didn't press him with questions about his army or his plans. They spoke only of the land ahead, of ruined bridges and dangerous patrol routes. It was almost as if they were warning him, not threatening him. He didn't understand it. Why help him survive? Why not just finish him and be done with it? As night fell, they offered him a place by the fire. He didn't sleep, but he stayed. Every so often, one of them would glance at him, not with suspicion, but as if making sure he was still there. It was a strange kind of watchfulness. When morning came, they packed their supplies quickly. The leader turned to him before leaving. "If you head east, you'll find what you're looking for," he said. Kareth didn't know what that meant, but before he could ask, they were gone, moving with the silent precision only humans had. Stood by the dying fire, staring in the direction they had taken. Part of him wanted to follow, another part warned him not to. The war had taught him to fear human movements he didn't understand, yet something deep inside told him this encounter was no accident. If they had spared him once, and now twice, there had to be a reason. And if that reason was waiting for him in the east, he would have to find it, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Kareth left the burned-out campfire behind and began moving east. The sun was weak, barely cutting through the gray sky. The wind carried the faint smell of metal and smoke, a constant reminder that the war had not yet ended. He didn't know what the humans meant by telling him to head this way, but his instincts told him it wasn't random. Humans rarely acted without purpose. The land ahead changed as he walked. The ruins gave way to long stretches of open field, dotted with the skeletons of machines. Some were his people's armored carriers, half buried in dirt. Others were human vehicles, burned to nothing but twisted frames. The battlefield had no loyalty. Both sides lay broken here. Kareth moved between the wreckage carefully, scanning for movement. This was the kind of place where scouts liked to hunt. By midday, he saw something on the horizon, tall fences of rusted metal, wrapped in coils of old wire. Beyond them stood a cluster of buildings, their roofs patched with scrap. From a distance, it looked abandoned. But as he got closer, he noticed movement. Figures walked slowly between the structures, some carrying crates, others repairing walls. They were not soldiers. Their clothes were mismatched, worn, and dirty. Refugees. Kareth stayed hidden, watching. There were both humans and aliens in the camp, different species working side by side. That sight made his pulse quicken. In his world, humans and other species didn't share anything except battlefields. Yet here they were, building something together. It didn't make sense. This wasn't an official military outpost. It was something else, something the war hadn't destroyed. He decided to approach slowly, hands open to show he wasn't armed. The first to see him was a small alien child with pale green skin. She froze for a moment, then ran toward one of the adults. Soon, a group came forward to meet him. Among them was a familiar face, the human soldier from the river. His armor was gone now, replaced with plain clothing, but his eyes were the same, calm, sharp, measuring. The man didn't raise his voice. "You made it," he said simply. Kareth didn't know how to respond. "What is this place?" he asked. The man glanced over his shoulder at the camp. "Somewhere the war hasn't touched yet," he replied. "And somewhere we're trying to keep it that way." Kareth frowned. Humans and aliens together? That's impossible. The soldier's expression didn't change. "Not impossible," he said. "Just rare, and worth protecting." They led him inside. The camp was rough, but organized. People shared food, worked on repairs, and tended to the wounded. There were no flags, no ranks, no orders shouted across the yard. Everyone moved with a quiet purpose. Kareth could feel eyes on him, some curious, some cautious, but no one threatened him. It was the first place since the war began where he didn't hear distant gunfire. The soldier explained that this camp was made of survivors from both sides. Soldiers who had deserted, civilians who had fled, people who had seen enough killing and wanted no more. They lived here hidden, moving supplies through old smuggler routes. "The war will end," the soldier said, "but the hate won't. We're trying to change that, one life at a time." Kareth didn't know if he believed it, but the sight of enemies working together stirred something in him he couldn't name. That night, they gave him a place to rest and food to eat. Lying on the rough bed, Kareth thought about the humans who had spared him, not once, but 3 times now. They hadn't done it out of weakness. They had done it because they saw something in him, something he didn't yet see in himself. He wondered if this camp was the reason they had let him live. If so, then his survival had never been an accident. It had been part of their plan from the start. As the camp settled into sleep, Kareth sat up and looked at the dark outline of the fences. Somewhere beyond them, the war still burned. But here, there was a fragile quiet. He wasn't sure how long it would last, or if he could even be part of it. Yet for the first time since the front fell, he began to think of something other than survival. And that thought both scared and tempted him. The morning came with the sound of distant thunder. It wasn't from the sky, it was the sound of artillery far away. Kareth stood at the edge of the camp, watching smoke rise on the horizon. Even here, war was never far. The human soldier from the river walked up beside him, his face set in a grim expression. "The fighting is moving this way," he said quietly. "If they find this camp, they'll destroy it. Both sides will." Kareth felt the weight of those words. He had seen what happened when armies found a place like this. It didn't matter who lived there, or if they were armed. The war erased everything in its path. "Then we have to move," Kareth said. The soldier nodded. "We will, but moving a camp like this takes time. And we don't have much." His eyes met Kareth's. "That's why I spared you." The words struck deep. Kareth didn't answer. "Right away. You kept me alive, for this?" The soldier didn't look away. "You know the land. You know how both sides think. You've survived what no one else from your army did. We need someone who can lead the civilians through the dead zones while we hold the line." Kareth stared at him, unsure if it was trust or desperation that made the human ask this of him. Maybe it was both. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. People packed supplies, patched up vehicles, and gathered the wounded. Kareth walked among them, giving quiet instructions on how to move without being seen, which routes to avoid, and where to find cover. He was surprised at how quickly they listened, not because he was human or alien, but because he knew how to keep them alive. It was the first time since the war began that he felt like more than just a survivor. When night fell, the humans who had found him prepared to stay behind and delay the enemy. Kareth stood at the camp's edge, ready to lead the first group. "Out!" The soldier from the river walked up, carrying a rifle. "Once you reach the ridge, follow the old riverbed north," he said. "Don't stop for anything." Kareth hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why me? You could have chosen one of your own." The soldier gave a faint smile. "Because no alien survived the human war front except you. And people follow. Survivors." The march was long and tense. They moved under the cover of darkness, every sound making hearts race. Kareth led them through collapsed tunnels, over cracked highways, and into narrow valleys where shadows swallowed them whole. More than once, they heard the distant echo of gunfire, but they kept moving. His knowledge of the terrain saved them again and again. By the time dawn broke, they had put miles between themselves and the camp. From the ridge, Kareth looked back one last time. Smoke was rising where the camp had been. He knew what that meant. The humans who had stayed behind were gone. They had traded their lives for the safety of those who now stood beside him. A heavy silence fell over the group. They didn't know the cost yet, but Kareth did. And he would carry it with him for as long as he lived. They moved on, away from the war and toward uncertain safety. Kareth didn't know what awaited them, or if peace was even possible. But as the sun rose higher, he understood something. He had survived the human war front not by chance, but because someone had believed he could be more than a soldier. Now it was his turn to prove them right. And for the first time, the thought of surviving didn't feel like enough. It was time to live.